Fourth and final section is getting water on the ballot. We've heard today how agencies, legislators, regulators are advancing and stalling when it comes to supplying an abundant water supply for California. Do water agencies need to take things a step further? Is the best course of action for agencies to develop their own water ballot? Here to answer that question is moderator Adam Probolsky, president of Probolsky Research, David Beltran, who is managing director of Bear Star Strategies, and attorney Jim Sutton, partner of Rattan and Tucker. Folks, have fun.
Thank you, Fritz. Thanks everybody for having us. I'm Adam. First, I'm told they're making lunch, so just chill for a little bit. So we are here for one purpose, and that is to help you all start your own GoFundMe campaign for water infrastructure. And you've got the experts here. Jim Sutton is a partner with Rattan and Tucker. I'll call him the dean of political and election law attorneys in California. Been doing this a long time. And he is the one rich guy that didn't leave San Francisco during the pandemic. So he's still there. David Beltran is managing director of Bear Star Strategies, the definitive Democratic political firm, strategy firm in California. And he is a communications specialist, knows his stuff. Worked for Barack Obama's campaign, worked for then Attorney General Kamala Harris, LA Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa. Maybe he's got us some insight on the governor run, I don't know. And also worked for Major League Soccer for LA Galaxy. So got a lot of experience here on the panel. Since 1993, California, we'll call that modern history because I graduated high school about then. Californians have passed 48 bonds statewide totaling $200 billion. So there's pretty good odds, 75% passage rate, pretty good odds there. A little difference between citizen initiatives and legislator, but basically really strong numbers. And there's essentially two ways of going about this. You can have the legislature put it on the ballot with a 2/3 vote, and we'll hear more about that. Or you can do the kind of DIY, watch YouTube method, and try to get it yourself with a whole bunch of signatures and then spend the money on the campaign itself. So with that basic background, I'd love to start asking some questions here. And just so you know, the voters, from a polling perspective, the voters care about water. They think about water. They care about climate change. You can say those words, and it's not like a toxic set of words. People understand that it's things are changing, whether they necessarily are lovers of the science part of it or not. So, David, I'm going to start with you. How do you break through the noise of all the marketing, all the campaign stuff, all the things that voters hear, and talk to them about water when they're kind of oftentimes most concerned with what's happening today, right? They're in traffic, they're mad about traffic, or they see wildfires, that's what's in front of them. How do you break through the noise of the things that are happening today and have them think prospectively about water?
Thank you. That's actually a really great question. But I will think about it in two ways. Number one, it's not just about the message, but let's just think about what the media landscape looks like. How do you get information? Even if you think about, goes to the core of your question, how do you break through? Just think about how many apps you have on your phone. How many subscriptions do you have? How do you watch TV, right? The conventional wisdom was, you bought broadcast TV and you got through the voters. That obviously has completely changed. And while California is still probably one of the most expensive places to run a statewide campaign, it's also just gotten way more complex and complicated on how you reach voters. So how you break through is very much different for every sector that you are trying to reach. And if you're trying to, for example, pass a bond, is you can now isolate a group of voters to build a coalition to win. right? And we've had multiple examples of how we've done that in the past. And I would just start by saying every campaign is different. There is no cookie cutter approach. You have to start in reverse. You have to reverse engineer of how you get to a winning campaign. But you have to look at the current political environment. What is the message that's going to resonate? But what is your coalition? Who are you trying to reach and how are you going to reach them? How are you going to motivate them? How are you going to motivate them to actually get out and vote? So it's two-pronged. It's, what is the issue that they care about? And I'll use the example of, and we worked that a bit on this too, is there's, now it's gone to ballot twice, but this rent control was Prop 21, also Prop 5 in 2020 and 2024. I've lost track of the years here. We were able to direct some messaging that was targeted at Republicans, and in particular MAGA Republicans, that really, it was tight. We kind of swooped at a win, but we were able to carve out voters to help us get us over the finish line. On that instance, it was about Weinstein, it was about him being kind of a liberal hack. It just motivated kind of this MAGA base on kind of grabbing from both and taking us over the edge. So again, it's two things. It's making sure that you're getting them with the right message, but you're getting them in the right place. It's kind of multi-platform media campaigns that if you're not doing that in this day and age, you're not winning.
I want to follow up real quick because you mentioned coalition. You talked about MAGA Republicans in a democratic, clearly democratic state. Most people in this room still think Orange County is a Republican county, but we're very purple. And we kind of very much look at the world as right and left, Democrat and Republican, Fox News, MSNBC. That's just how we see it, or we're told to see it. I don't think most people in this room necessarily see it that way, but is that really a thing in California? You need to talk to Republicans in California. You need to build a coalition that's outside of just progressive Democrats, and and you say you can do that and have impact.
Yeah, you 100%. And again, every instant is different, every campaign is different, but there's this kind of conventional wisdom that, in my opinion, has probably changed, is that we needed to have about 60% support on a ballot initiative to be on good footing. And I think that's changed with what you said. You have these folks have kind of respectively gone to their corners and they're just there, right? And so if you have to build a coalition and now you have the ability to reach them in an isolated way, you're not going to put a broadcast ad and it's kind of like a MAGA related and have it on NBC. It's just not going to work. It might actually backfire on you. But now that we have the technology and we have the data to be able to reach people, specifically the voter that we want, yes, to build a winning coalition, you're reaching out to progressive Democrats with a certain message, and you're reaching out to, let's just say, MAGA Republicans with a very different, distinct message that's going to motivate them to get out there and vote. But together, they're going to give you a winning strategy.
Okay. So, Jim, from the moment you get that call from someone who's got a little twinkle in their eye of a statewide ballot measure, a bond measure, to actually seeing that ballot book from the Secretary of State in 90 seconds or less, tell us what all happens there.
Well, sure. I first have to respond.
Maybe a few more than
respond to your comment about where I live. San Francisco is doing great. You can listen to anything that you hear about in the newspaper. Come on up. We have great catchy water that everyone, I'm sure, knows all about. So San Francisco is doing great. So with bond measures and ballot measures concerning water issues, as Adam's already mentioned, there's two ways you get on the ballot. You get on the ballot kind of easy way, which is having the local city, the water district, or the state legislature put the measure on the ballot. The campaign is still difficult, or you get on the ballot the difficult way, and that is by gathering signatures on a petition to qualify for the ballot. Right now in California, in order to get a measure on the ballot, you need to gather signatures from about 550,000 registered voters. But to really make certain that all those people are registered, to get an initiative on the ballot, you have to gather signatures from about 750,000, 750,000 people. So when someone calls and says, oh, we want this great idea, we want to be in a statewide ballot, my first piece of advice wouldn't be legal advice. My first piece of advice would be go raise more money than you could possibly imagine and go raise it right now. Because the biggest expense to get a measure on the ballot is, of course, what you have to pay the signature gathering firms. I don't think a statewide ballot measure has ever qualified just with volunteers gathering those signatures. And it used to be back in the day that maybe you paid a firm $1 a signature, $2 a signature. Those days are over. It changes every month. It's a very supply and demand driven pricing model. I kind of coming into this talk to some people and I'll throw out $10 a signature, but we've seen $20 a signature. We've seen $30 a signature, certainly for some of the locals. Partially kind of interestingly because gig economy and employee independent contractor. And even though the signature gathering firms tried to get an exemption, they couldn't. So all those signature gatherers are now employees. That's raised the cost. So to get a statewide measure on the ballot, just the signatures alone are going to cost you $7 or $8 million. So that's kind of the first thing.
And then from there, let's actually talk about the lawyer work that you get paid for. So they're out there, they're raising money, but you write this thing, you write this ballot measure. It's very prescribed language, and you deliver it to the secretary or to the, I guess, Secretary of State, and they give it to the Attorney General. And like, what does that all look like?
So there's a handout that. It's unfortunately, I'm already having my handouts out of order. So the fourth slide is a calendar that we prepared, which is how to qualify an initiative for the statewide calendar. And I believe there's a QR code. And the first thing you do is you have to draft the measure. You're drafting the law is what you're doing. And in this world, you need a water expert, which everyone in the room probably is. You need probably a tax expert, because if it's a bond measure and there's a lot of rules and laws that change every year and court cases about bonds, that you have to have an expert on that. And then you need someone like me, you need an initiative and election law expert. And I think we'll talk more about this. It is perfectly appropriate for an agency to use their public funds to go hire the water expert, the tax expert, and the initiative lawyer to draft the measure. But you draft the measure, and again, if you're doing it the easy way, then the state legislature just puts it on the ballot. If you do it the difficult way, you have to hire the signature gathering firm, print the petitions, and go scatter around the state trying to gather signatures. And Adam, I don't know if you want me to talk about this at this moment in time. Either way, if you have enough signatures, the registrar of voters verify the signatures, then there is drafted by the Attorney General or the city attorney, county council, the little wording that goes on the ballot that says, shall a $40 million general obligation bond for the purposes of water projects be passed? And what people like, I've worked with people like Dan over the years, is for a majority of voters, maybe for certain measures, all they hear about the measure is what they read on the ballot. All the fancy ads, all the mail, all the social media campaigns, most people don't see, especially for measures that aren't that sexy, right? Like a water bond measure. So that wording that goes on the ballot is incredibly important. The law says it's supposed to be fair and impartial and not favor one side or other of the measure. But especially on the state level, where they're written by the Attorney General, and the Attorney Generals, past several of them, have been very partisan, how they choose those words can make a huge difference in the campaign. Just, I think yesterday, a court in Santa Clara County board put a measure on the ballot, the special election ballot, in November to make up some of the money that's been cut from the federal government. So in the question that the county council wrote, and that the Board of Supervisors voted on, there was some reference to President Trump, like in order to backfill the funds that President Trump has cut. And the judge ordered them to get rid of the word Trump. right? Because obviously that was meant to cater to the voters who would kind of say yes to fight President Trump in any way. So that's, I was kind of surprised. I looked up the ballot question for Prop 4, the water bond measure that was in the ad. And if I could find the wording, it said to authorize a general obligation bond for water, wildfire prevention, and protection of communities and lands. Well, if I was the lawyer on the other side, I would have sued over protection of communities, because that's obviously sending a message that this, of course, everyone wants to protect communities. One thing just last about the ballot questions is, I told you what the legal standards are: fair, impartial, neutral. But unless challenged in court, they go on there. So you'll often see, especially with local school districts, the wording that you'll read will say, in order to make certain that our children are safe and that all carcinogens are taken out of their playgrounds, shall that bond measure be passed to build new schools or whatever it is. And if it's not challenged, then that's what the voters see.
So there's like 100+ elected officials in this room, and some of them have been sued or sued someone when it comes to their ballot title or ballot statement. But take us into that courtroom for a minute, because you've done this before. You've had a client that's been sued, or you've pursued something, and you're in front of the judge and you're arguing, and it's fairly clear in the election code what you're allowed to say and what you're not. But sometimes, things happen in that courtroom. What is that like? And is it just because of the judge, or is it, what happens in that room when you get your kind of sneaky little language in there, or you get them to get rid of their sneaky little language?
Are there any judges in the room? I have done a lot of these cases, and what I've learned in those cases is, I'll just say, I don't like judges, and it is all about the judge's personal political ideology. And most judges will say, no, I'm just applying the law to the facts, but they just can't, take away how they feel about President Trump, how they feel about public schools, how they feel about whatever the issue is. Now, the good thing about these lawsuits, especially from my perspective, and for those of you in the room that are litigators, you'll be surprised, these lawsuits all happen, they're filed, they're briefed, they're heard in maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, because the ballots are going to print. So if you're arguing over a word in the ballot question, it's got to be done before the registrar sends the things to print. So first of all, the judges are pissed off because you've just screwed up their entire schedule. They've got to come in early. They've got to read something over the weekend. And then, as Adam mentioned, the law is not that complicated. There's maybe 10 reported cases, and the cases basically say adjectives have no place in a ballot question, really almost any adjective. But they're, again, actually the newspaper article I read about the Santa Clara measure, the reporter said that he or she had gone to the court hearings, felt like they were in high school English class, because you're sitting there arguing over, I went over this word, what was the word, saving communities? Protecting communities. Is protecting a neutral word? If it's not a neutral word, what is a more neutral way of saying it? So they're kind of fun in that way. And I would say half the time, the better judges will say, I'm not touching this with a 10-foot pole. I do not want to be accused of interfering with the election. You guys go out in the hall and you duke it out. And yeah, some of these words are problematic, but you work it out and come back and make your proposal. So I would say half the cases are resolved by the parties having to agree, and the other half are resolved by whatever the judge thinks about the ballot.
The whims of the judge. All right, so David, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the ballot measure itself. It's on the ballot. It's the signature. Well, the ballot measure's been written, and the campaign comes to you and says, we want to get this on the ballot. You've got to go out and help them collect hundreds of thousands of signatures, maybe 700, maybe 800,000. And the reason, by the way, is not because there's some subjectivity to that. It's because you collect a signature, but somebody else might collect that signature. There's duplication. Also, people coming out of the supermarket might not know whether they're registered to vote or not. So there's a whole lot of reasons why you need to get extra, because you don't want to go through all that effort and then not have the signatures you need. But Jim mentioned different dollar amounts. Why is that the case? Right? Is it because when there's one signature gathering effort, it's a certain high number, but if there's a medium number, it's kind of like, oh, they can carry multiples, or if there's a lot, you've got to break through and have them carry yours. And what does that process look like of getting the signatures? And then then he says the registrars verify them. There's 58 of those. What does that process look like before you actually have the Secretary of State saying you're on the ballot?
Well, Jim's the expert, so he'll probably elaborate a little more, but I think a lot of it has to do with the marketplace as far as how much per signature how much you're gonna be charged, right? And so it can get really expensive, and probably $15 million is probably in today's age is probably a more accurate number. And for the reasons you said, there's a lot of duplications, there's a lot of verification. I mean, you probably lose a good percentage of the signatures you collect. So it's a long process. You have to overshoot it because you need some sort of safeguard to get to the number that you want. You're also under a time crunch, right? So it's you got to do within a certain amount of time. But that's, I don't know if there's anything more specific than that, but Jim's kind of, again, the kind of expert on that. But really, it's about overshooting it. It's expensive, yes, but if that's your route, you know that it's been done. It's been done before. We did it with Jerry Brown, the legislator. But it's been done before. It can be done. It's time consuming. It can be expensive. But if it's the right issue and you provide some air cover on the issue, it does make it easier.
So for both of you, I mean, we know there's two routes. If you go through the legislature, I think everybody probably expects you're going to get, let's say, a legislator or a coalition of legislators to sponsor it. They put it before their colleagues. It's very unlikely that something that this room comes up with would be what gets on the ballot, because there's a lot of other things that people want to add on to that. To talk about that process a little bit?
That's the problem there. I think you have to be, you just have to be really disciplined. You got to be working with a good team of legislators that, for lack of better words, it's just if you don't get a bunch of legislators kind of hanging extra ornaments on a tree, and then when you come out on the other end of it, it's what you initially wanted. Number one is because that's essentially what we would have pulled on the front end, saying this is a viable proposition. We know we can pass it, right? And this is the way we're going to do it. But it's on the other side of it, you come out with something that's vastly different. You don't know if it can pass, right? I mean, if a bunch of stuff has been kind of snuck in there, could be some stuff that's maybe just a little, it can be toxic. It really does change the game. But you are saving $50 million, right? And so I think it's a question you have to ask yourself, and it can be done. You just kind of really have to make sure that that the extra stuff that's being added, it's not a game changer as far as what the core messaging would be, or one, that it becomes problematic if there's something in there that's just a non-starter.
Jim, have you seen that process happen?
And there's definitely a legal element to it as well. When you're drafting a bond measure, the bond measure doesn't list out by name every little project that the money's going to fund. It kind of lists out by categories, and then there's a whole process that goes on for years if it passes about local agencies, cities and counties applying to the state for that bond money. And I am there as a lawyer. I would want the language to be as specific as possible for the exact type of water project that you want to fund. But of course, the political consultants are worrying more about having language that will get votes. And a lot of times the public agencies want a little more flexibility in where the money can go and what type of project. So that's always kind of a tension. And there are court cases about, what was the word about, rehabilitating, renovating, rebuilding of libraries. This is one of the big court cases about ballot measures. And that those words all had different meanings. And it was, I believe it was Berkeley that wanted, it was a rundown, dilapidated library they wanted to tear down and then rebuild. And whatever word was used in the law, they weren't allowed to do that, because the judge determined that, renovate doesn't mean tearing down a building.
Very careful. Okay, before we get to maybe how everyone in this room can be much more participatory in this process, David, I want to kind of understand what happens next. So it's on the ballot. Somehow you've raised the $15 million, or you've convinced legislators to put it on there. It has some semblance of what you were trying to accomplish by the time it gets on the ballot. And what does that campaign look like? I mean, you need how many millions, and who's spending it, and what are they spending it on?
Right, so you get to that point and, brass tacks, you're probably looking between 20, 25 million to pass something in California. California's still one of the most expensive places to run a statewide campaign. And what that looks like, it's just a paid media campaign. I think, some people think about, well, what about field and what about knocking on doors? To bring that to scale in California, it's really expensive. And really, if you look back at it, it's not done well in California. It's just too big. You can't scale that up. So it's really about persuasion. It's about motivating voters. And it's really about a paid media campaign. And it goes back to what I said when we first got started. You have to do that in a smart way. Obviously, the landscape has changed from the last time we passed the water bond with Jerry Brown. And so it's just about, again, reaching folks and where they're at with the right message. We work with someone like Adam to make sure that we have the right message, but we know who our voters are and how do we go get them.
So
and that's really something that's won in the last 4 to 6 weeks. That's really the window of communication, and that's where we're spending a bulk of our money, which is close to 85 to 90%.
So the people in this room can't will it to be successful, is what you're saying. Because I think there's some idea that if I put, if I get enough lawn signs and if I talk to enough of my friends, and if I, send enough emails to my neighbors, and I take, the flyer I print out on my printer and I bring it door to door, that I can have an impact. You're saying I can't have an impact.
Look, if you're running for a local city council, yes, you can. That's the first. When you're talking about a statewide campaign, it's just you can't do that. Lots of lawn firms are not going to get you there. It's really about getting up on kind of mass communication.
And when we talk about mass communication, there's probably about a third of the people in this room who still have cable. Well, actually, in this room, it's probably about 70% of the people have cable. But like in California, it's pretty small numbers, maybe a third or so. Probably better than I do. So you can buy cable TV, you can buy broadcast TV. You were talking about buying social media. What are those different places that you actually buy the ads?
Yeah. So broadcast TV, yes, people still buy it, right? And you can. Right, but even that, the term, when you talk about broadcast TV, when you think about traditionally watching, right? We're talking about the evening news, a football game, a basketball game. But even those things, people don't watch them in the same way, right? So broadcast TV meant you go to your local rep and you buy something on what traditionally is your TV, right? But now you can watch Monday Night Football through a streaming service, right? And so again, it's all fragmented, and it's way more complicated than it was before. You're buying in 15 to 20 different places because people are just watching TV in so many different ways, right? And so you're not buying in that way. And just to give you an example, YouTube, who has kind of dominated in a lot of ways the space, has more viewership than the 3 to 4 legacy broadcast companies of CBS, ABC, and so just that alone tells you the way people have changed in the way they view, and they're not necessarily watching live TV. right? The average person will go and they will watch, there's all this curated videos and people have a million different interests, right? And YouTube has just done a really good job of cultivating that audience. But you can reach people exactly with what their interests are. There is, I know it makes people uncomfortable, but there is a vast amount of data on how to reach people, on what their interests are, how they watch TVs, what their habits are. And so you're getting them at the right time, at the right place, and with the right message. And that's something that we've not been able to do before. And I think, unfortunately, has not changed the way that it's not cheaper to do that. It's still very expensive, but we can be more efficient. We can reach the voters we want. And as I mentioned before, you can isolate voters. You can build these coalitions where if you went up with a broadcast ad, in some ways, you can repel some voters and get others, but if you isolate them and you reach them where they are, you can have vast different messages. And that's about building that winning coalition.
And you talk about different messages, maybe to different communities, different groups. What about language? Everybody in California speaks, every voter in California speaks English to some large extent, but why would I bother talking to people in Chinese, in Spanish, in Korean, in any particular place?
Yeah. Well, look, I think cultural, the kind of mention of cultural specific ads is still that's important. You want to show respect. I think there's certain communities that just still get their information that way. But YouTube, because of their size, they actually have a lot of research into this. And just kind of, let's just take as an example, kind of the bigger population here, and we're talking about Spanish. A lot of multi-generational households are still now being dominated by kind of this multilingual programming. So a lot of it, you're reaching these groups, but you're reaching them in English, and YouTube has kind of had the research to back that up. And before, when you used to buy broadcasts, and let's just say Univision, because they dominated kind of LA, I think it kind of goes into Orange County, but when they dominated that market for over a decade, they were number one. And so you would 100% buy there, and you would buy it in Spanish, right? But that's not the case anymore. Like you can watch Univision, and there's an ad in English, right? Because there are, in some homes, it's just, you have these families that are multi-generational and are becoming much more English dominant. And so that culturally has changed. But there are other stuff, and sometimes we do quite a bit of the different Asian languages as well. And you still, in some communities, you're still doing radio, you're still doing that kind of stuff. But generally, the research has shown that those homes, particularly when it comes to Spanish, we do mostly English stuff. Okay.
So there are billions of dollars in this room, controlled in this room, public agencies. Jim, there's awash with money, and how can they spend that money, right? You already said that they could do some research, they can hire lawyers, but like this is going to cost $15 million to get signatures and $25 million to run a statewide campaign. Like, can they just write a check?
No. And so my first slide, you can go to my first slide, is a summary that's kind of a document that has kind of been updated and prepared over the years about what public agencies can and cannot do connection with ballot measures. And I hope the document is useful for everyone in the room because it applies whether you're promoting a statewide water bond measure or you're somehow involved in a local measure in your community. And the general rule is you can't use public funds to try to convince voters to vote for something. That's kind of the general rule. But of course, there's nuances. And the most important nuance is, and I think a lot of agencies don't understand this, agencies are allowed to spend public funds up until the point that the measure goes on the ballot. As Adam mentioned, and as I talked about, you have to hire lawyers to draft the thing. That can be done by your staff, on their staff time. You can use your agency dollars to go hire outside attorneys. You can do polling with public funds at the beginning to find out what should go in this bond, right? And is it going to pass? We're just throwing good money after bad. You have to be a little careful with polling. You do want to talk to Dan about your polling and Adam, but you can't really poll about what messages will resonate with voters. And obviously that's a very kind of fine line. And you can also hire a consultant with public dollars to kind of explain the whole process to you up until the moment it gets voted on the ballot, whether that's because the state legislature puts it on the ballot or the registrar of voters tells you have enough signatures. And then at that point, it all becomes, you can't spend money trying to get voters to vote for it, but you can spend money educating the public in a fair and impartial way. That phrase I just gave you is a subject of, it's in the law, it's in FPBC regulation. There have been several cases interpreting that. What does it mean to be fair and impartial, and just educate the public, which is a core part of your function, right? That you have public education officers, public information officers, and telling the public our infrastructure is failing, our water treatment plants are outdated, we don't have enough water. That's part of what you have a right to do, and have a right to spend taxpayer dollars. But you can't say, so therefore you have to vote for Prop 4. And it's that kind of fine line that is still a nuance, and it's still kind of open to debate. So if you don't mind me going on, the slides that I brought, can you bring up the next slide? Is that Cathedral City? Yeah. So there it is right there. The FPBC is the state agency that enforces the state's campaign laws. And so they're in charge of enforcing when a government agency crosses the line and puts out materials that are not just kind of educating the public about what's going on, but are actually trying to encourage people to vote a certain way. And in the last 5 years or so, the FPBC has become very active levying fines against public agencies. It's in my memo. I don't remember. For Cathedral City, the fines were about between $15,000 and $30,000 for the local agencies. And there's always some gadfly. There's always some anti-tax person who's going to file complaints. So I thought this example was good because the standards are fair and impartial, public information, and the other part of the legal standard is the material the type of thing that the agency normally does. Like the agency puts out flyers, the agency puts things on its website, but does the agency normally do bumper stickers? So this was an FAQ, right? This is the kind of thing that the city puts out all the time on various public policy issues. And if you look at it, it's pretty neutral or pretty plain, right? And it doesn't look like a campaign ad. And at the very bottom, it says, material provided for informational purposes only, doesn't advocate for the passage. And they had the consultant who prepared it for them, knew fully about the law, and these ads were vetted by legal counsel, yet the FPBC still said they crossed the line. And the problems were in the fourth question, what are the nature of residents' complaints? This is all about Airbnb laws. And these are the words that the FPBC said cross the line from public education to election advocacy. Complaints, disruptive, illegal, late night parties, people coming in and out, criminal activity, and multiple stabbings. Now, the city said, but that's all true. We get all these complaints. Well, we just took information out of our complaints. The consultant just picked it out, and that's why we had to kind of, pass this law that's now being subject to referendum. And the FPBC said, nope, you went too far. You crossed the line. $15,000 or $30,000 fine. I don't remember. Okay, let's go to the next slide, which was Poway School District. This was part of a PowerPoint that the school district did that they kind of would use at public meetings, just trying to get a school bond passed. And in a way, now that you guys know these legal standards, fair and impartial, the type of things cities all usually do, this does jump out a little bit more about how they cross the line. But what the FPBC said was ensure, and the capital, all bold, safety, security, success. So on the one hand, it just described what the bond measure would do if it was passed. That's all appropriate. You can say what it's going to do if it passes. You can say what's not going to happen if it doesn't pass. But they said that this ad also crossed the line. Now, the big example, which is a TV ad, LA County paid a $1.3 million fine, I think 2 years ago, promoting a homeless bond measure. Not only were the TV ads prepared by a consultant who knew what they were doing, vetted by the campaign's election law counsel, not me, and vetted by county council, right? The FPBC still levied a $1.3 million fine. But what I kind of know is that the county was like, we don't care about some FPBC fine. We don't care if it's $1 million. We're going to ask, forgiveness, not permission, because guess what? We just got a $200 million bond cash to pay for homeless measures. And it was definitely kind of a risk-benefit analysis that the LA County Board of Supervisors did. So again, it's a nuanced line on what's permissible and what's not permissible. And I hope that the memo, we try to be conservative in our advice, kind of helps provide guidance.
So what I took out of that is they can hire me and they can hire you. They can't hire David. Okay, all right. Just want to make sure. Very good. So let's make sure everybody understands, though, and gets clarification. If what we're saying is that Darcy, when she's on the dais, cannot say, as an agency, we want the voters to vote yes. But Dennis, when he's at a press conference sponsored by some PAC, can absolutely say vote yes. If you're not on the dais, if you're not representing or you're not staff can't initially do it unless they're volunteering somewhere else. What does that look like? Can I still, as an elected official, say that I want you to vote yes?
Well, actually, and this is an important point, is that your agencies are allowed to take votes supporting a measure. And that whether you put it on or whether you want to take a vote on some statewide ballot measure. And that kind of happens all the time. And you have public comment and you can kind of publicize that vote. Blah, blah, water agency supports Prop 4 the same way you publicize any other vote that the agency takes. So they can actually, as part of a vote. Okay. What you can't do, when you're the elected member of a water board, you don't have you're not working 9 to 5, but it's no campaigning in the government office, no using your government emails or your government cell phones. That's kind of pretty basic rules. No using any agency resources, but certainly not only are you allowed to volunteer for the campaign, but I think it's very common for directors of agencies to be the spokesperson for the campaign. And we always say, the first person you talk to is the HR person about how do I document that I'm doing all this on my vacation time, on my personal time, right? However that works, you want that documentation because there will always be complaints filed against you. But then all the time on the campaign trail, I love what Dan said is forget about the campaign trail, forget about community groups, forget about going door to door, it's all just TV. But on the local level, when you go to a community group, the director of your agency can go, say, I'm here, yes, I'm the director of this water agency, I'm not here in my paid time though, and I'm here to kind of talk to you about the measure.
All right, so this brings us really to the place where we get to where does this money come from, right? We already know they can't write the checks beyond you and me. So when there's billions of dollars in a place like this with these agencies, they spend hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars perhaps, and those dollars are spent with contractors and lawyers and pollsters and people who lay pipe and do all the things that build infrastructure. Those people get millions of dollars for that work. they might be likely suspects for fundraising. Tell us how that happens, Jim. Like, how do they go out there and ask those people to put money in? We talked earlier about the example of school bonds, of who funds school bonds. How does that work? Can they just go and say, "Hey, give me some money," and you give 100,000, you give 100,000? How does that work?
So if you look at the, every campaign has to file reports disclosing every cent they raise and spend. And if you look at those reports for the bond measures, it's not exclusively. A lot of it comes from the contractors, the architects, the engineers who might be hired should the bond pass and these projects get built, right? A lot of the other money comes from unions, right? Whether they're the private sector unions who, if you're going to build a huge water project, there's going to be a lot of good union jobs, or depending on what the bond is, it might be the public sector unions as well. So that it all has to be private money. And when the campaign goes out and raises that money, totally legal, happens all the time, to target the engineers, the contracting firms that are likely to benefit if the bond passes. And the statewide campaigns are certainly sophisticated enough. You just can't promise that they're going to get the work. But the way the system works, there's no way to promise them they're going to get the work, because as I mentioned, when the bond is passed, that doesn't fund a particular project with a particular contractor. There's a whole process of deciding which projects get built, and then it's up to that jurisdiction to decide who the vendors are going to be. So the legal limitation is all private money, no public money, and no promise that by writing a check for $100,000 you're going to get a project. City College in San Francisco, the former chancellor went to jail for 6 months because he went to City College lessors, people. It was a coffee cart company and some other private, like the food service that had contracts, and said, just don't pay your rent for the next 6 months. Give that money instead to the ballot measure campaign. So there was this explicit quid pro quo, and he didn't think that was illegal. He didn't have a lawyer telling him otherwise. So he paid the price for that.
I want to save a minute or two for questions, but I want to make sure everybody can maybe get some more comfort around this, though, Jim. Where's Mark Boutier? Is Mark still in the room? Oh, there's Mark. There he is. So I just want to make sure that if one of these directors on their own time went over to Mark and said, "Hey, Mark, I need $250,000 for this water bond," and Mark wanted to be generous and he wasn't being compelled to, he could write that $250,000 check with the promise of nothing coming back his way, but with the hope that put in a competitive bid, he would get some business, and there would be a lot of that business to go around that he could potentially bid on. Good?
That's exactly the process.
All right. So anybody feel free to hit up Mark. And nobody goes to jail for that, right?
No promises.
Okay. On a quick question, David, newspapers. Like if a bomb, if everybody got food poisoning, let's say in this room, like no one would read a newspaper in California tomorrow. Like this is the last vestige of newspaper readers like there is. Do newspaper editorial boards matter anymore?
The short answer is no, right? But let's put some context in it. I'll give you an example. Yes, they're good to have, you see them on ads, right? And they're compelling, and they're stamped of approval, and it's great. But I'll use this as an example, and I don't think this is not a knock on the candidate because I don't think it had nothing to do with it. But for example, Malia Cohen ran for state controller, and I think has the record of not getting a single endorsement from a single newspaper. Obviously, she won. We did that race, and I think that the issue was just more about having a counterbalance to Democratic control across the state, right? She won handedly, right? Clearly, it did not matter that she did not have a single endorsement from the newspaper. While all the other candidates that did spend money said, I am endorsed. In fact, the Republican candidate got every single endorsement, I think, from every single newspaper, right? So he touted that. I had every single endorsement from every single newspaper in California. He lost, right, handedly. And so, it doesn't really matter. I think it changes just a little bit for ballot initiatives, just because people want to understand that they're kind of on the right side, but ultimately, they are not the difference maker they once were. I'll leave it there.
Okay, we got a few minutes. Let's get some questions from the audience for our very smart panelists. Yes, sir.
My name is Marwan Khalifa. I'm the executive director at Aqua. And I've traveled over the last 6 months, I've traveled through the state. One thing that I think, over the last 6 months, I've traveled throughout the state and meeting our members. And one thing I think all our members can agree on is infrastructure needs funding and we need funding. So a ballot measure like this, I think would be supported. I got a number of board members in here, so I think they would support that too. The question is, how can an association like Aqua be supportive of a measure like this?
Let's go from a legal standpoint first.
Legally, do you have, are all your dues public agencies, or do you have private members also?
So private.
Then it kind of goes back to what I said. It's about public money and private money. And you're a 501c6 trade association. So you could sponsor a ballot measure. You could be in charge of it. You can go raise the money and you can do it on your time as long as you're only using kind of the private dollars. And there's kind of a series of FPBC advice letters to the trade associations in the public-private sector and how they have to do it. I believe the League of California Cities, that I think has 100% public funding, they kind of got in trouble. So yes, you can do it. You need to talk to the FPBC first, but you can sponsor the measure. You can be in charge, right? You can hire Dan. You can hire me. You can go raise the money. So, and Adam, hire Adam.
Okay, who's got another question?
Thank you, Adam. And again, as I said earlier, I think it's a great forum here and great ideas being presented. And my question is for Jim and Adam and everyone is, if before this initiative starts, could the districts form like an outreach to the businesses that are, I call them in their sphere of influence, and begin just, updating them and getting to know them better, developing our relationships with all those contractors and all the vendors and engineering groups? Is that a viable and legal way to build that relationship?
100%. I said legally, the legal restrictions don't really kick in on spending public funds until the measure qualifies for the ballot, right? So setting up a coalition to see, because what you're really doing is testing viability, right? By seeing whether there's a donor community. You hire Dan or Adam, they tell you what the budget's going to be. It's kind of like the fundraising campaigns we've all been involved in. You have to kind of do a viability study. So you go talk to the vendors, whomever it is, to see whether you can get to the $25 million. That's all perfectly legal. It should be done.
Well, that's something everybody can do tomorrow, right? Get your list of all your vendors together and start meeting with them and talking to them about whether they're interested in being supportive. It's a kind of coalition that you could work on, couldn't you? Other questions? We got just a couple minutes here. Is there one over there? No? Okay. All right. Well, then let's keep going. So let's maybe, David, create an ad right here, right now. Like, use your creative genius, and we're trying to sell like a pipeline. We're trying to sell a water treatment plant. We're trying to sell a reservoir. What's the imagery? How do we make that sexy?
Well, I think we would back up a step and we would work with Adam because like everything we make is data driven in a sense that we test everything even before we start producing. So we have a series of concepts And then actually even after we produce the ads, let's just say we might produce 5, 6 ads, and then we will test them and see which one works the best. You know, it might not be that everything will look like
2 minutes.
it might not be exactly what you mentioned. It might be something that we define differently. I mean, most campaigns are about some sort of fight, right? And that's just going to motivate people. So I'm not saying this would be the way, but maybe it's about Donald Trump, and maybe it's about how he's turned his back on California, and maybe it's about that, and using some of those examples. That's about to go. You know, but again, I think it starts with testing before we even get to the concept of like, what is this going to look like? And I think people want, you know, think of 3, 4 different ideas and do a few things at the wall and see if things can work.
So it's not just about this is good, this will help us. Americans love a good fight. It could be bring in the fight, bring in the us versus them, and make people choose a side.
Yeah, good guy, bad guy, but ultimately it's going to be, we want to fight in the turf that we want. I use an example is the gas tax. You know, people wanted to make it about a pocketbook issue, and we made it about public safety when we passed 50% of the vote, right? We protected the gas tax. And I think we made it about something that was different from Titus and you know, whatever, right? So you gotta find the angle that's gonna motivate people, what's gonna be compelling, what's gonna break through to your question earlier. But it all has to be working hand in hand with the pollster about coming up with 4 or 5 ideas and testing the heck out of one.
Well, thank you both. I will say that we talked mostly about statewide here. There's definitely opportunities on a local basis to do this in your own agencies, and it just kind of happens on a micro scale. And it might not be a bond, it could be something else, but communicating and understanding what your residents and voters think and communicating back to them in a way that's meaningful is really important, even if it's just on the local level. Thank you very much, both of you.